All right. I think we're live. Well, welcome to class. Again, we're going to be talking about a miracle of Jesus, and tonight's scripture that they gave me, because I'm following the kids' curriculum and what they're doing, and so I went in and my wife goes, here's your scriptures. And I went, great. And it's like 4 verses. And I went, all right, so we're going to be done at 7:10. Maybe not. We'll put a little bit more than that. So I've got a couple other things that I'm adding on the end, because you know me, I can't just talk for 5 minutes. I got to, if nothing else, I'd tell you stories for another 20. So we'll stretch this out just a little bit with it. But it's actually a story that you probably are familiar with if you have watched The Chosen. I know you're familiar with because they portrayed this in there pretty well. So continuing on with the miracles of Jesus, tonight we're going to be in Matthew 8:23 through 27. You thought I was kidding when I said 4 verses. It really is. But it's a great story because it goes along with what we were talking about. The thrust of Jesus' miracles, again, is always to show who he is and to show who God is and to show that he has the authority over all different things because he has that from God. It's not just Jesus saying, you know what, I think I'll do something nice for somebody. It's him saying, you need to understand who I am. And so this particular set of verses, the way it's portrayed in The Chosen, is how Peter then gets his faith. And we're going to see that in the scripture. They play it out really nicely in that. I probably should have played the clip, but, you know, hindsight type thing. But you can see how the attitude of, in this situation, Peter and even those in the crowd changes. This is pretty early on in Jesus' ministry. This is not after he's been around for a year or two. This is right after he, comes out of the wilderness. He's been baptized. He's just starting to call his apostles. And so he's up around the Sea of Galilee. He's walking along the shore, and we have this situation that comes up in Matthew 8. And it says, then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Now, I'm on the wrong one this week. I'm on the wrong one already. This is the different one, calming the sea. So he got into the boat, and the disciples followed him. He had been walking around there, and he decided he was going to go to the other side of the lake. He decided he was going to travel across. And so he talks with the crowd a little bit, tells the disciples, hey, let's get in the boat. I'm jumping ahead of myself, so let's go back to today's story. I said, we're going to go across, and so his disciples followed him down there, and it says, suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake. Now, one of the weird things about the Sea of Galilee is it is way below sea level. A lot of times we don't think about that, but from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea, the entire Jordan River runs under sea level. So I think we know that the Dead Sea, of course, is way below sea level, but we don't think about the fact that that whole stretch, all the way up the middle part of Israel there, or actually the edge of Israel, not the middle part, but the edge of Israel, is all below sea level. It's kind of a descent. So you come up from the sea, and you go across the Shephelah, the plains, and then you get into the hill country. And then when you get to the top of the hill country, it just like descends and goes way down below sea level. Of course, Dead Sea being the lowest point on earth. And so you go down into that valley. But what that creates is its own little ecosystem, in a sense. And so, I know we've got a few people that have been over there with me and a few people have been there other times. But when you are going to, say, Masada, which is on the shore of the Dead Sea, and you're 1,200 meters below sea level, and you're sitting down there, and it can be 65, 70 degrees in Jerusalem, and you travel the 20 miles down to the Dead Sea, and it's 98, or even just over 100. And so it doesn't matter what you've got in the hill country. When you get that low, the temperature changes drastically. And I was over there at the Dead Sea One to Bisbee many years ago, and I was sitting there and I saw storm clouds rolling in off the Mediterranean, and I went, oh, we're going to get some rain. And the professor that I was going to school at that time, he said, no, we're not. And I said, well, I don't know much about your weather, but those are rain clouds. Yeah, they're coming right at us. Yeah. I said, I think we're going to get some rain. He goes, no, we're not. I said, how can you be so sure? He says, not the right season. Well, you didn't tell the clouds it's not the right season because they're sure rolling in pretty hard off the Mediterranean. And he goes, it's not going to rain. And I said, okay. And sure enough, it got to the edge of the drop in the terrain there off the face of the mountains, or the face of the hills there going down, and it just rolled back on itself and just kind of dissipated. And I went, that is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And then he goes, oh, wait for a while. So we waited for a little bit, and then on the Jordanian side, it like reformed and started raining over there on the plains. And he said it's just got its own little updraft ecosystem that sits over the Dead Sea. And he says, but here's the weird thing. What's the number one cause of death in the Dead Sea Valley? And I said, I don't know. Snake bites or something like that. He says, drowning. And I'm like, well, but you can't sink in the Dead Sea. He said, no, but when it rains like it was up in the hills, he said, you're down here and there's no rain and it's completely dry, but these canyons, these wadis that go up into the hills, people hike them. And he said they'll get into these areas of the wadis that have really steep cliffs on the sides, and all that rainwater will form up and it'll just come down in walls of water. And I know last time we were there just in December, there's a section of highway we had to circumvent because the whole highway was washed out. And so you're standing in a desert that doesn't get hardly any rain, and then you're looking at a bridge and a highway that's washed out, and you're like, how in the world does this happen? Well, it rained 10 miles up the mountain, and this is the result of it. And he said a lot of people get caught in those canyons if they're not watching the weather, or if they're not watching what's going on up at top, and they get into those steep ravines and they can't get out of them because, you'll get a 6 to 8, 10 foot of wall of water that'll come rushing down through that wadi, and if you're not prepared for it, you're kind of doomed. So the ecosystem, the weather system in that area is unique to its own self because formation, we joke here about the Omadome. That's like a super Omadome. It really changes from one area to the other, and it can be just a few miles, and the weather drastically changes. Same thing on the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee still quite a ways below sea level, like 300 meters below sea level. And so the thing with that is it has its own weird little weather fronts that come through. And same trip, actually, we were getting ready to take a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee, and the guy who was the captain of the boat we were getting on said, I'm not taking you out to the middle. And we went, okay, we're happy to get a boat ride. He says, I'm not going to go more than about 100 yards offshore here or whatever. He said, that's about it. He said, I won't even get probably that far. He said, probably I'm going to stay within that pretty easily. And I'm going, okay. We said, why? And he goes, weather. Kind of the same thing, only the opposite deal of it's blue skies and, everything looks fine. He goes, He goes, it's a bad day for weather. He's a fisherman. He's been on the sea his whole life. And he said, no. He said, with what's going on over that hill, he said, I don't feel comfortable taking you out. And he was talking about the fact, he said, storms will come up so quickly, and if you're out in the deeper part, you can get trapped out there and you can't get back into the shores. And he said, every day there's a tide that shifts in that lake because it's so deep. And he says, it'll shift, and people know that if you're swimming in the Sea of Galilee and you go out just so many feet past shore, you can get caught in that, and it's like a riptide almost in the ocean, and it just takes you out. He said, if you're like in a little kayak, it just takes you out. He said, it's not violent. It's just you can't get back. You can't paddle against it, really, and then you have to wait till it kind of stops dragging you, and then tide will go away, and you can come back in or whatever. But he said a lot of people get trapped in that because they're not used to it. So when you're talking about the water around this area, you're talking about a phenomenon that is not something you would see in Lake Manawa. You know, we think of lakes here, even some of the bigger lakes in the area or up in Minnesota, and you think, you know, it's a lake. How bad could it really be? Well, it can be really bad. And like I said, even seasoned sailors on that area know if it's going to storm, you just don't go out there because you don't know what you're going to get yourself into, and the waves can come up so abruptly, and I've seen it very choppy and very harsh, so they just kind of stay away. So that's what's happening here. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, and it can come up sudden. And it says, so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. So does that mean that Jesus, you know, took his sleeping pills before he got on the boat and you couldn't wake him? Or is there something else being said about what was that? Oh. Okay. Wow, okay. Anyway, Jesus is in the boat. He wasn't that, he can't wake him up. He's just such a sound sleeper, or he took his sleeping pills, now you can't wake him up, or something like that. It's that Jesus understood there was no real threat right there. And when he was asleep in the boat and the waves were crashing over the side, of course, his disciples went and woke him up saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown. We're doomed, we're dead men. We're not going to make it out of this. Because if this boat swamps and goes down, we're not going to be able to swim to shore. So we're all going to drown right here." And yet Jesus, in the midst of that storm, is calm. He's sleeping. He's taking a nap. And when they went to him and said, "Whoa, wake up," he wakes up. But he doesn't wake up in panic. Okay? He wakes up, it says, and he says, "You have little faith. Why are you so afraid? Why are you freaking out? It's a storm." And they're seeing it as, this is going to be overwhelming. We're not going to get out of this alive. There's no way we can survive this. And Jesus says, "You have little faith. We're going to be fine. Don't be afraid." Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of a man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And, you know, when you look at that, it's a great story. Here they are out in this boat, waves crashing up there. They think they're doomed. Jesus says, "Be still." And everything gets calm, and they're like, "Wow, what did we just witness? What did we just see?" And again, did it benefit them at the moment? Yeah, it saved their necks. And so they're like, "Whoo, good miracle." But what was the purpose of it? Jesus is telling them, ye have little faith. You get so freaked out about every little thing. And you need to trust in God. You need to trust that it's not what you're seeing. And, of course, the other meaning of this that we can apply this to is how many storms we face in our own lives. And when we face something in our life, it seems like that's the end. How in the world am I going to get through this? How in the world do I take one more step? How in the world do I go on from this point? And Jesus is there going, "It's not that bad. I've got you." And I think a lot of it is just like the apostles had to take their eyes off the storm and put their eyes on Christ. Sometimes we have to do that same thing. Now remember, I work in a junior high and high school. Everything is a crisis. Everything is drama. Everything is the end of the world. And right now we're getting ready to go into homecoming. And so it's everybody wanting to ask somebody else to homecoming, and that is the end of the world. What if they say no? People freaking out. But you know, I can make fun of that, but what do we do in our own lives that's similar to that? We laugh because we look back on it and go, oh, I remember high school. I remember junior high. They don't even know what troubles are yet. But you know what? Jesus is looking at us and going, you are making so much more out of this. Why are you trying to make so much drama in this when really you've just got to put your eyes on me? You just got to trust me. And I think to all of us, he can at some point say, oh, ye of little faith. You're just kind of saying, it's all on me. How do I get me out of this? Now, Jesus, come help me get me out of this. And Jesus is like, I got a better idea. How about you trust me and I will get you out of this? But he's the one who gets us through that and gets us out of it. He doesn't just help us to be able to do more ourselves. He steps in through us so we can handle that situation. And so, you know, when you face many things like that in your life, I want to remind you to go to him and say, okay, it's bad. What are we going to do now? I think I'm getting swamped here. I think I'm going to drown. I don't know what I'm going to do. And let him calm the storm around you. Because too many times I think we ride the storm out a little too long. And we don't say, I need you now. Because, I don't know, I guess I'm speaking from my own self, and maybe you can relate to this, maybe you can apply to this. I still struggle with trying to take care of my own problems and not giving them to God when they're smaller problems. But I think I can handle it until I can't handle it. Then it becomes more of a panic, and then I'm crying out to God rather than saying, God, at the beginning, hey, I'm giving this to you now. I don't know. Like I said, maybe that's just me. Maybe you can relate to that. But God wants us to bring the little problems to him too. And he wants us to be in that constant communication and relying on him in every way, every day of our lives. And so I think it's just a good message sometimes for us to hear, to think about, that it doesn't have to be waves crashing over the boat before we cry out to him. We can cry out to him just when it's waves lapping up against the boat. Say, you know, Lord, I'm glad you're here with me. You're the one in charge. Tell me what to do. Lead my day. Lead my footsteps. Lead my path. Let me follow you in all that I do. So, like I said, it's just a few verses, but I think there's a lot of meaning there. And I think we're like the disciples a lot. We tend to be those people of little faith in that respect, and we wait till it gets out of hand, and then we're like, okay, God, now do something. Now take over. But I don't know. I think we need to turn it over a little bit quicker. But we know that when we do turn it over, he is there to bring us through that storm, no matter what it will be. Trusting him, knowing he knows best, trusting that whatever he brings us through, it's the way that he intends us to come through it. And if we give it to him, we come out stronger on the other side. It builds our faith, it builds our endurance, and we can face the other things of life. So, I think it's a good little passage, good little mention. I do want to show you a couple pictures, like I said. This is the Sea of Galilee. So it kind of looks like Africa. But it's actually the Sea of Galilee. At its deepest point, it's like 140 some feet deep, which makes it a little different than most lakes we're going to encounter here in the Midwest. It is about 8 miles across and about 13 miles long. So it's not a small body of water. And when you get onto the middle of that, you can still see shore all the way around you, but you get out there and you realize you're a ways out onto the water, especially when you're looking at its farthest points. But that's just kind of what do you want to call it, a topographical relief map, showing you where the deepest spot of it is, and it just goes back down. The Dead Sea all the way up through the Sea of Galilee, all the way up actually into the Hula Valley up there. It's all below sea level because it's all a big fault line. And so it is all collapsed. And it sealed itself off at that fault line, but you're dealing with everything, lakes and river and everything below sea level because of that effect. And me, it was a little bit weird, I'll have to admit, when you're standing down at like the Dead Sea and you're looking at this cliff face beside you and you realize behind those rocks is the Mediterranean Sea. And I'm way down here and sea level is way up there. And it just kind of makes you pause and go, wonder what if. And then you're just very thankful that God made rocks very hard. And the Dead Sea is shrinking. And so they've talked about trying to figure out a way to bring water in from the ocean to start to replenish it a little bit so they don't lose the Dead Sea. But they have to make sure that they can do it in such a way that they won't change the salinity and stuff of the water. So it'd have to be done very gradually, and it'd have to be done in the right manner for it. And so they're looking at that going, how should we put this how do we do this? And it was kind of funny because when we were over there, we were listening to some people talk about that. And they said the biggest problem with it is if you build a pipeline from either the Red Sea or the Mediterranean Sea and you bring it into the Dead Sea Valley, they said you don't have to worry about can we get a pump to lift the water like you would normally have to worry about. It's how do we shut it off? Because you got so much head pressure on that thing that once you open that valve, how do you shut it back off and not have the whole thing fill up and become sea level? So, yeah, which means it would wipe out everything past the Sea of Galilee. I mean, so yeah, it's like kind of we got to make sure we could regulate that, get the right, because again, you don't want to destroy the ecosystem that's there by putting in something foreign just to keep a river or a lake there. So anyway, so this is the Sea of Galilee. And up in the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, there were a couple of gentlemen who were out fishing one day. They were part of a kibbutz up on that northern shore, and they were walking along the shore, and they found some nails. And they were like first century type nails or whatever. And so it kind of made them get a little bit curious. And so they started to look and dig, and what they wound up finding is this boat. Now, this is a first century boat, first century fishing boat. So this would have been similar to what they probably would have had with the disciples and the apostles, because it is a first century fishing boat from that area of Galilee, the area that Jesus and the apostles were in. However, you will find this, if you want to look it up on the internet, they'll call it the Jesus boat or the first century boat. I am not going to tell you Jesus was in that boat. Okay? Some people might tell you that. This is Jesus' boat. It could be, but I'm not going to say that because how many boats were there in the first century for fishing? So it could be. Hey, maybe that's why it's preserved. But this is kind of what it would have been like. And so this particular boat is kind of a fascinating story because the way that they got it from there, they found it in the mud to the place where they have it now, which is at the kibbutz. They built a museum for it, and they put it in there. But what they found is as soon as they started to uncover it, it started to decay because it's so waterlogged that as soon as it hit air, it started to become spongy, and then the spongy just becomes dry rot and it falls apart. So they had to figure out how to uncover it. So what they did is the first part when they were uncovering it is they had to continually have people spraying water on it. So as you're getting the mud and stuff off it, you have to keep it wet constantly. You cannot let it dry out at all. It can't be sitting there in the air. It has to have water on it. So they're spraying water all over it and stuff like that. Then once they got it pretty well exposed, they figured out the best way to preserve it at that time is to seal it off so that air can't get to it. So they sprayed it with basically an expanding foam, a polystyrene, and they just sprayed it over the thing and encased it. Then they actually, to move it from the shore where they found it down to the kibbutz, they floated it on the Sea of Galilee again because they had sprayed the whole thing with that foam, and foam floats too, so they floated it across the Sea of Galilee. It made another voyage. When they got it to the kibbutz, they made a special tank, they put it in. And they had to sit there and painstakingly, again, spraying water on it, pick all of that foam back out of all the wood grain and all the little nooks and crannies and everything else to get it back to the wood. They got it back into basically a lake water. And then over a long period of time, they started to add a paraffin to the water. And as they would add more of the wax, it would displace more of the water until they got it pretty much to a full liquid paraffin type consistency. Then they were able to pick it back up out of there, and it's encased in wax, essentially. It's not a thick wax, but it's a real thin wax, but it sealed it off to the air, so no air can get to it. Then they were able to build that metal frame around it to support it, because it doesn't have a lot of structural integrity anymore. So that's what that stainless steel frame is around it. It's a bunch of little arms that go up with pads on it, and it just holds it in place the way they found it. But it's in the museum now, and you can go see it. Now, this would have been a fishing vessel, probably similar to what we were talking about in the story tonight. So Jesus is sitting up in the front, because the other thing I don't want you guys to think about is, okay, yeah, they were in some big yacht, and Jesus is asleep in the front. No, it was not a big boat, most likely, because this is pretty common to what they would have had there. And so he was up at the front of that thing sleeping. And then they had to go wake him up because he was relaxed and sound asleep. They do still fish on the Sea of Galilee. They fish regularly. The kibbutzes and stuff there bring in fish every day. The restaurants bring in fresh fish every day. So there is a lot of fishing. One of the trips I was out on the Sea of Galilee, we got to watch them do some fishing. And it was fascinating. Number one, you can see the seagulls that are like, ooh, it's fishing time, which means buffet for them, because they pour them into these boats and then they can just get to them. But if you look at that picture, the small boat alongside the larger vessel is the crane vessel. The smaller boat is going to be filled with fish. And so they cast the nets out. They hook the nets onto the side of the smaller boat. Then the opposite side of the net they hook to that crane, and they pick up the far side, and it forces all the fish to fall into the smaller boat. And they will fill that smaller boat, and they might have a couple of those even. They'll fill them up with fish, and then they'll tow them back into shore, and then they'll process the fish. So they still do a lot of fishing over there. But if you ever get a chance to go over to Israel, you will get a chance to ride in a boat, and it'll probably be very similar to this. They're all pretty much the same size. But you walk out onto these large piers, and you can get onto the boats, and then you can go out onto the Sea of Galilee, and depending on what time of day you are there, because I've been there first thing in the morning, and I've been there about the last thing in the evening, as everything is kind of shutting down. But it is absolutely beautiful to go out on the sea. And again, it is so calm many times that you just go out there and it's just like so serene. You can just sit out there. And when we were there this last trip, it was fairly calm out there. There's a few waves and stuff, but we were like the only boat out there because tourism is so down. So we got to have a lot of fun. We did some singing and dancing and all kinds of stuff. But the sea is really beautiful up there. This is a picture, obviously, from shore, looking down at the Sea of Galilee shoreline there by one of the kibbutzes. This is looking out from like the side of the boat looking across it. And again, you can see the hills in the background back there, but you can also kind of get a perception of the distance. So that one with the clouds out there further, it kind of obscures it, but the hill line is just above the sea level there, or the level. And then this last one, we're going to see if this works. There you go. Just a little boat ride for you. So that's our, riding out the storms of life, just as the apostles rode out that storm, not by their own, cunning or seamanship or anything else, but by surrendering to Christ and saying, help! And that's what we need to do so many times. is surrender. And my encouragement is don't wait till the waves are crashing over the side, but instead be willing to ask for his help as soon as you recognize the problem, as soon as you realize there is one, because he's waiting to help you. He is there for you. You do not walk through the storms of life alone, but you have Christ walking with you. So, all right. Thank you for tuning in. Oh, I got my slide. There we go. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for being a part of the study. People at home, thank you for tuning in. And we hope to see you Sunday. And again, as always, we'd love to see you in person if you can make it. So we'll